Welcome to Never Rewrite. I'm Isaac Askew.
And I'm Jeffrey Sherman. And today we're going to talk about why you hate testing. So tell me, Isaac, why do you hate testing? What did testing ever do to you?
Well, I don't hate testing, but everybody else I've talked to seems to. And that's kind of what this episode is about. Out of maybe 200 or so engineers in the last 10 years, I've probably met around three or so that actually like testing. Most of them seem to do it just because they have to do it, or they know it's either they have to do it or they know that it's important, but they don't actually just like enjoy it. It's just like it's still something. It's work, right?
Yeah, I mean, you put me definitely down in the I do it because that's the way to do good work. And I always try to do good
Right,
work, not because I enjoy it.
right. I feel like a lot of people really just hate testing, and maybe that's a strong word. But
No, I know lots of people who hate it. They feel
well,
strongly.
I was reflecting on it. I think I have some reasons why people probably do hate it. And I was thinking about it recently. I was thinking back to the first startup that I was at, and at the time, I had never really considered testing as like a thing outside of just like making sure that whenever you write your code and you like load your page, that your function works. Just kind of like a QA
Hmm.
kind of thing, not like testing in the sense that we're talking about here, which is like I guess which is good not to be vague. Testing is in like automated testing, writing unit tests, integration tests, acceptance tests, the testing pyramid as is known as it is known.
Take three.
Uh, the big three. Um, so back then at that first company, when testing was introduced to me, I think I guess I didn't understand it because like I looked at it and I thought, okay, well I'm writing a test that's testing the thing that I just wrote is doing the thing that I've already confirmed that it's doing. So like what's the point? It didn't cross my mind that I would be preventing future regressions. It was just more like here's more work you have to do to deliver. And I didn't understand why. It didn't seem valuable to me. It seemed like it slowed me down. And just like we you might see in some mocks like in some testing mocks today, people can end up writing tests that actually don't do anything. They just assert that their own very contrived mock returned data they told it to return. And that's the kind of like behavior I think that I was testing. I was actually writing a bad test, and it wasn't that testing was bad.
Right. I've definitely seen that where by the time you get to the end, you're like, I'm not sure that I've actually tested anything other than that I know how to write a test. Um, and
So,
so why does that happen?
well, I don't know. I don't know why it happens that people write tests that way. I think it's more of just an ignorance thing. Like when you first are trying to write tests and you don't really know what you're doing yet, you end up just going in there with any kind of framework, looking at the documentation of that framework, and then ended up writing some kind of wacky thing just because it's your first time. I think it's your own attempt to write a test, and then you do it poorly, then you go, okay, this wasn't useful. So I think it's just ignorance. That's why.
Hmm. So you started off not knowing why it was useful to test.
Yeah, I didn't know why it was useful to test. And so I didn't do it. And at that particular company, it didn't matter. Um, well, one because the company it was a startup that ended up not really making it for non-testing reasons. um, but we could like our clients use the code during the day, and during the night we could push code to our own heart's content, that kind of thing. And so since we could push code and test on demand, basically, without the client being affected, we just did that instead. And we never really had automated tests. Actually, we didn't even have a CI/CD pipeline or anything at the time. This is before we even had any kind of integrations like that. This was just purely going in and pushing code on the live
Hmm.
machine, that kind of thing.
Were you pushing code in production?
Pushing code in production, yeah, and it worked for that company. And so I never really had to learn at that company why testing was important. So I continued believing that testing was a waste of time and stupid just because I was doing it poorly, but not knowing. So it wasn't until the next company that I went to that I actually saw a more useful test case. This actually kind of brings me to, I guess, the first reason is not understanding why tests are useful. That's one of the first reasons for, hating testing. The second is it's
Right. It's
slow.
just something that other people make you do.
It's something that
Hmm.
other people make you do. Right. And so this is the slow reason. Testing is slower. So whenever I first got to the second company, they required testing. And I wanted, me being someone who basically relocated to this new company, I had to move across the country for it. When I got there, I wanted to hit the ground running. And they required tests and a lot more thorough code review there. And that really slowed me down because I got, it would be like a one line change. It was just a small thing. And that's all, like, I literally just want to push this one thing and they wouldn't let me push it because it didn't have test coverage.
Hmm.
And so I thought, okay, well, let me write a test. And then I looked at it and they had a test framework there that was useful and they had some decent tests, but a lot of them were acceptance tests, which were really slow. And so writing them actually took not only were the tests slow, but writing them took a long time too, because there was a lot of mocking you had to do for that flow. So I was really frustrated because delivering code required a lot more time than I was used to, and I was eager to prove myself. I wanted to go ahead and like, wow, Isaac just got here on day one and has already fixed like 6 stories, and deploy, but I couldn't even deliver one in a day because I had to spend the rest of the day trying to figure out the nuances behind their testing service, how they write tests, the convention for their tests,
Hmm.
then just understanding and just in general, like what I was testing, the product itself.
Was their code easily testable, or was it difficult, and that's why they had unit tests in the first place,
Well, they had, yeah, acceptance tests rather.
or acceptance tests?
Yeah, their code was difficult to test. So
Hmm.
that's actually the third reason I have for why testing or why you hate testing,
Hmm.
is that testing is hard to for code that is untestable, which sounds kind of silly, but there is certain code that exists out there that it might be like 3,000 lines of PHP code in a single file with no classes, um, and you can't really test that code in a normal way that you might imagine testing like nice object-oriented class-based code or something. And so it ends up being the case where you're given a huge file to test. There's one
Hmm.
line in the file that you changed, and there's no way you can reasonably test that file without refactoring a huge chunk of the logic. And the refactor itself would be untested because there's no test to begin with for this file. So you're in this kind of catch-22 situation where you have to refactor code to make it testable so that you can test it.
And that's not easy for new developers. It's not easy for experienced developers. It's the kind of thing that gets foisted onto new developers. Like, hey, well, congratulations on graduating college. Welcome to the company. Here's some terrible code. Write some tests. You're gonna have to refactor
Exactly.
it without understanding anything.
Right. It's like day one, you want to make a change, you think you know the system, but first of all, you don't know the system, you don't know the product yet. So there's no way you can make a change safely, which
Hmm.
is why you need tests to begin with. And then you can't even test the code that you're given because either a test framework maybe doesn't even exist and they just started requiring testing, or the code is so old and convoluted and non-object oriented and just functional that it becomes very difficult to extract and test it. So the normal method would be like you find a chunk of code, a chunk of logic, and you need to extract that area that you changed.
Hmm.
Um, but some of the code might be so old that there's like 10 dependencies that you have to pass into that particular function, from like API helpers to, Google class or some other kind of API that you need. Um, some globals that you'd pass in because you don't want to use globals in the test or mark those for the test.
Hmm.
And then you end up having this function that requires like 10 to 20 parameters because of how convoluted the code is. And then you need to mock each one of those parameters for your tests, which is good because you've done dependency injection. You're working slowly towards more testable code. But then now you're stuck with mocking every parameter you passed in to make sure you can get to the last bit of logic you were trying to test for your code
Hmm.
change. So it ends up being an incredibly long process just to get your first test going, especially if no one has tested that file before and there's no other code examples that you can use from other developers to kind of copy and paste and tinker with to kind of like start to learn how to test better.
Right. It sounds like a case of, well, we've sinned in the past, and now that we have sinned in the past and we've seen the light, so do as we say, not as we've done.
Right.
And you are now responsible for the sins of our fathers. We've written this terrible stuff, and you get to write the tests.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's one of those situations where you kind of are required to pair with somebody who is more senior just to understand the code and the code change around it. There's definitely companies I've joined that did not even have a testing suite set up. And so telling a junior developer or someone at least more junior to testing, telling them that they have to add tests, but first you have to find a framework, then install that framework and have it set up. And then testing doesn't matter if you don't even have a CI/CD pipeline that requires your tests pass. I've actually seen a project before as well where there's a test directory, and then it's on the developer to just run that suite and say, "Yep, I promise I ran it and it passed before I tried to push it." Because normally your pipeline will be something that if a test fails, it rejects your PR from being emergeable. But there are some cases out there where they don't do that either.
I worked at a place around 2008, and it was international, and so we would have Swedish companies headquarters in Sweden, and the Swedish developers had a nasty habit of pushing broken code right before the end of the day, Sweden time. Oof. So that the Americans would have to fix it. We'd come in and their last thing would just be they'd commit something and they're like, oh, the test also took 45 minutes. So they'd be their last commit. And this is back in the Subversion days when you didn't branch so much. So everybody worked off trunk.
Right. So what did you do? Did you just
we swore at them a lot. No, I mean, like with the Russian developers who also thought that the Swedish developers were bad.
Interesting. Okay. No, I meant like, what did you do? Like, I assume that the pipeline failed and that you just kind of like it pulled down code and to test it and pass it, and then you had to correct those tests and correct the code.
Yeah, that or you just didn't pull down the latest that day. It was another thing. All kinds of passive aggressive activities going on there. It was not a healthy situation.
It doesn't sound like it.
That company eventually went under. Actually, that has a very good full rewrite story as well. But
fantastic for a future episode. Well, yeah, those are. Actually, one other thing that I thought was interesting is that when I went through university, they did not require that we learn any testing. So in none of my classes across 4 years of classes was there a testing framework mentioned. I was surprised by the fact that testing automation was a thing when I graduated. That's how blindsided I was by this process, which is kind of baffling to me in retrospect, like that colleges would not require that, or at least my college at the time in 2009 to 2013.
My college also, I don't remember writing any unit tests, and this was 96 to 2000. So slightly more forgivable, but really not. That's a bit of the dichotomy of, universities versus trade schools, where universities try to get you to think about software and engineering, but trade schools actually teach you how to code.
Actually, speaking of which, when we go back to reason, the second reason, which is testing is slower, and why people don't like doing it. I get the startup culture kind of reinforces that. They want you to move quickly. And so I think it doesn't really help that if you just joined your first startup outside of college, you haven't learned some of the testing stuff in college. And then no one in your earlier startups ever taught you the usefulness of it. By the time you start requiring that in maybe a more mature company that needs those tests in place, like a finance company that would certainly want test coverage around money movement.
Oh, you'd think that.
Yeah, okay. It sounds like there's like a little bit of a thread to pull there.
Oh, Having worked in finance for well about 15 years total, let me
Hmm.
assure you, there is terrible, terrible code around money movement. Um,
That is absolutely terrifying.
the best, or not the best, but a recurring theme is don't use doubles or floats to represent money.
Hmm.
That is a very, very common mistake. That if you can imagine why that might be a bad thing, because they're not precise enough
Right.
and they round. So we've got three reasons why people might hate testing.
Hmm.
They're just ignorant of the value. It slows them down and it's hard.
Right.
And so we didn't really cover kind of the enlightened version. So
Hmm.
you're ignorant of why testing is valuable to you. Why is testing valuable to you? Is you posited you just wrote the code, and now it's written, and you manually tested it.
Hmm.
How much better? How much value do you get out of writing a test at that point?
Uh, that's the tricky part. It's about future value. It's about future you or future your colleague, right? So it's
Mm,
hard to tell how much value you got in the moment, especially because like some people are like big on like happy path testing versus like 100% pie in the sky kind of dream test coverage, that kind of thing. Yeah, I don't think you'll really ever appreciate the value or the usefulness of testing until you see a case where it prevented something bad from happening, and that's kind of hard to see. You can't. I've seen it. I think at that second company I mentioned, the one where I first found kind of like, oh, this is interesting. Um, I found the a pipeline that failed because of a change that I made, and the pipeline failed because a unit test failed, and that caught a change of mine that would have broken another component. And so before I had not seen that concept. It was like I thought I was just testing my code, and then I realized the change that I made broke somebody else's tests. And then I thought, oh, okay, all right, I'm seeing the bigger picture now. It's about the regression. It's about locking in my current functionality so that future me doesn't break it, or one of my colleagues in the future doesn't
mhm.
make a change that ends up breaking my code. So who cares if you QA your current code and it works? Because it's about the future. And these things can kind of
I mean, I
stack.
would like you to QA your current code because I've had plenty of incidents where they didn't work, and if they had done any basic
Sure,
testing,
sure. I can phrase that better. I mean, who cares if you only QA your current code?
okay.
Saying that's like saying the sun was shiny when I was there the other day. It makes no sense. No one cares about that particular snapshot in time. They care about it continuing to have the same kind of behavior over time. That you can still keep coming back with your test run, and that it keeps passing. Um,
Mhm.
and so, like, there was one case I was thinking of at another prior company where the style sheet, there was like the shared style sheet between a lot of components, and people would keep changing one particular class, not realizing it affected some other things using that same class. And so it would keep breaking the style every so often when someone made this change, not realizing how many components were using that. And so one of the product people kept going, why do we keep having this problem? We've already fixed it. And then it happened again 3 weeks later, and we fixed it again. Why do we have to keep fixing this? And it was because nobody was writing a test to ensure that uh, the styles had not changed. Or and this is a little trickier because it's like design related and versus like functional. But it's the same kind of concept. If you don't have any kind of test at all in place, you can't prove that your code won't behave differently tomorrow when someone makes a different change. That is the main value.
Mm. Okay. So that covers ignorance, right? The
Mhm.
cure to ignorance is knowing that it's not about testing today, it's about future you or your colleagues screwing it up, not even knowing that they're screwing it up tomorrow.
Right.
Um, so how about testing makes you slow? When somebody complains, well, if I stop and write unit tests, it's going to make my work slower. Well, what's the response to that?
The initial response to that is get over it. Because there's no way, like if you are writing, 100 lines of code, yes, to write tests for 100 lines of code requires more time. There's no way around that. It's going to be a
Mhm.
little bit longer, or it could be a lot longer depending on how bad your situation is for your testing at your company, basically. How bad
Mhm.
the code looks, how if people already have pre-existing tests and examples and mock setup that you can use, that kind of thing, right? But it's one of those things that as you start seeing the value in it, that little bit of extra time to lock in your functionality ends up paying huge dividends later, because you can look and see, or at least for people who track their work and the bug
Hmm.
fixes and that kind of thing, you can see how often you're going back and fixing things that had an issue, like a previous bit of code that was broken, and someone said, okay, well, here's an edge case, or here's some other thing that we broke. Over time, you can look back at those tickets and say that's X amount of hours spent or money lost. And with tests in place and done properly, you can see less tickets and less hours being wasted. So again, it's one of those things that in the moment might seem like it slows you down. In the moment, it might not seem like it has much value, but it's going to prove itself over time.
Right. The time to write a test is so much less than the time to debug something that broke in production. Uh,
100%.
I, I have seen many teams that are just absolutely crushed. There's tons of bugs every day. There's reports. They have to figure out what's going wrong, and it takes hours. Usually they have one developer full time just triaging and working on bugs. And it's like, well, if you had tests, these bugs wouldn't be happening.
Right.
And it's
And
hard
there's
to you'd go so much faster because you get a whole developer back.
Right, and you have that kind of context swapping too. Like, imagine the first time that you're deep diving into some really tricky code, and you finally figure out, oh, this is where I make the change to affect everything. Man, this was so hard to find. Then imagine not writing a test for it, and then 3 months later, a bug happens, and you don't really remember exactly where you made that change. So you have that same discovery process all over again, however many hours all over again, unless you just had a really good memory. The bug itself might not even be it might even bring up any memories. It might be something that doesn't even seem related to your change until you finally spend double, triple the time tracking down what happened. And then you're like, oh, it was this thing. And that's going to
Hmm.
keep happening to you. You can't see it in the moment, but it will happen to you if you do not have at least basic testing.
Okay, so good. So we've covered ignorance. We've covered it slows you down. How about testing is hard? What do you say to junior to like early career developers who are like, man, testing is really hard. I came into this company and I have to make this test, and it's really hard to test.
Yeah. Testing is hard when the code is untestable. Like I mentioned earlier, this is kind of a funny thought, but you can write tests, or sorry, you can write code that is not very testable code, right?
Hmm.
So that type of code where you just kind of like where you don't write things that are either they don't have to necessarily be object oriented, but like things that are easily abstracted into small functions and little pieces where you're passing in just a few parameters, that kind of concept. If you don't write code that's testable in that way, then yes, it's really hard. And so again, to kind of dive into that, because that's kind of vague,
Hmm.
if you imagine right now like a really old file, again, like we'll go back to this idea of like 3,000 lines of code, it's just like someone just typed a bunch of stuff in one file. You can't really test that very easily. Imagine if you were trying to test the entire file and it was one big function.
Hmm.
You'd have to mock everything, every global, every included package, every API helper, everything you can think of, until your actual test for that was like triple the size of your actual file. So that kind of a code is basically untestable. So that's why testing is hard, or it seems hard, is because you're trying to test code someone wrote poorly. If you write or if you try to test code that's clean, it's really fun and easy. And you can
Hmm.
see that by actually doing stuff like test-driven development, where you start with your test and your assertion saying, if I make this call to this function, I should expect this value, and then building your code around that assertion until the assertion of the test is true. And then when you look back on it and you see, oh, wow, this actually was really easy to test. Or if you even take away your test, look at the code, then try to add a test back to that code, you'll find it's very easy to add a test to it because you wrote it to where it's so decoupled from the rest of the logic there. So yes, testing is hard, especially in startup code where you're moving very quickly and often writing very poor code. But when done right, testing can be easy. So don't anytime you think testing is hard, don't blame testing, blame the code that was written before.
So to rephrase, if testing is hard, that means your code sucks.
Yes. Your code is not structured very well. We'll phrase it that way.
Okay. And that somewhat ties back to our overarching theme, which is people are going to want to rewrite that code. You know, testing is hard. I can't test it. I need to rewrite it. But how do you rewrite it if you don't know what the current code does and you can't figure it out?
Right. So that does go back into this concept of characterization, to where like you either way you're going to have to understand your system. If you're trying to sell the pitch of a rewrite, you have to understand what features you currently have, so that you can rewrite those features to behave in the same way. So, like we mentioned last time, while you're at it, just go ahead and write tests for those things. Start extracting that code piece by piece, and start writing those tests. And the more you refactor that code, the easier that functionality is going to be to test.
So you're saying if you iteratively refactor your code to become testable, and then you write the tests, by the time you get to the point where you could rewrite the code with confidence, you will no longer feel that you need to rewrite it because the code won't be terrible anymore.
Right, exactly. And you won't be scared of changing that code. Once you've extracted and tested that code to a reasonable behavior, like again, you don't have to be like a 100% test coverage every branch, but to a reasonable path, the danger and scare around, oh, I have to edit this crazy code goes away.
And you can do it iteratively.
Right. Just piece by piece. So it doesn't require, like when you see a bunch of bad code, you don't think I have to rewrite the system to make it testable. Don't think I have to rewrite the system in general just because it's trash. Uh, just take a good hard look at what the feature actually is, or different features that are in that code, and then see there's things called fracture points. You can see where you can take out little pieces of functionality bit by bit, and death by a thousand needles the thing, rather than try to destroy it. What I mean is like each little needle takes away some of that big behemoth and moves it into a nice little tested component until you haven't destroyed the entire thing and rewritten it. You've just what's the ship concept?
Oh, the ship of Theseus.
Right, where you replace bit by bit by bit until it's a brand new system, but you haven't destroyed the entire thing. You iteratively replace the ship. You don't need to destroy the entire ship. Just replace the broken boards one by one.
I wrote a blog post about that recently. We'll have to link to that in the show notes. I called it the Code of Theseus. If you've iteratively replaced the entire system, have you rewritten it? Is it the same system?
Find out more at shermanonsoftware.com.
Yes. Show notes. Cool. Have we convinced everyone not to hate testing?
Have
we convinced anyone not to hate testing?
I feel like the startup industry is a I hate testing generator. It takes a lot of like reflection to understand that testing isn't the problem, that your testing is not the thing you should be mad at. But over time, people will learn.
Yes. Well, I think the startup culture puts you at the crux of all of them. It's people who are junior, and so they are ignorant because they just came out of college. It's people who need to go as fast as possible. And it's people who, when they encounter terrible code from their predecessors, they don't have the skills needed to refactor, because that's the hardest thing to do, is to understand and refactor in a scary system where you have nothing. So the lesson is, don't join a startup.
Don't join a startup. Join a mega corporation.
join a soulless mega corporation and have your soul crushed, and then test.
This podcast brought to you by Microsoft.
Awesome. I'll throw out our appeal. If you are in the middle of a full rewrite, or you're thinking about a full rewrite, or you've even participated in a full rewrite and you want to tell us about how it went wonderful and we're totally wrong, or commiserate with us about how it went wrong in exactly the way we kind of say it will, we would love to have you on. We're looking for guests. And thank you for listening. I'm Jeffrey Sherman.
And I'm Isaac Askew. And this is Never Rewrite.